Hey everyone, welcome back to Taboo Talk with Sarah, the podcast that breaks the silence, fosters hope, and talks about the tough stuff so you never feel alone. I'm your host, Sarah Jordan Ross, and today's guest has a story that on the surface sounds almost unbelievable. His journey includes addiction, multiple rehab attempts, a heart attack at 21. That one surprised me. Time spent as a fugitive in Mexico, and ultimately the long road of recovery and rebuilding. What interested me most wasn't the headlines, it was the deeper themes underneath them. Shame, identity, approval, and how much we seek it. Belonging. The stories we tell ourselves about who we are and whether we're worthy of love, of acceptance, or a second chance. Austin Rampt is the author of One Last Hit, a memoir that explores not only addiction and recovery, but also what it means to rebuild a life when everything seems to have fallen apart. Austin, welcome to Taboo Talk. I'm so glad to have you here.
Sarah, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to a fun talk today.
So when people hear your story, they probably often focus on the dramatic stuff, the addiction, the rehab, Mexico, which I will get you to tell me about because I think it's interesting, and all those things that make for a compelling headline. But when you look back, do you think there's stuff people miss about the story? What was really happening underneath all of it?
Totally. So, and even these things were placed in the book, but they're not the headlines of the book, right? So, but I do want to. So, when I was a kid, I had really bad tics, neurological tics, right? So my body would twitch like this and I'd bite my nails incessantly. And some of them were really bad. I would have vocal tics. So I'd be in the back of the classroom going, like a dolphin almost. And I was overweight and I was just a little ball of anxiety as a child. But because I was bigger than all the other children, I had a leg up on them at baseball. I was really good at sports. And I noticed that when I would hit home runs or I'd have a good game, my dad from the stands would be so excited. He'd be so proud in front of the other dads. He'd be going, "That's my boy," you know? And so somehow I got the message really early on that if I achieve, I am somehow worthy, right? And the flip-flop is also true. If I don't achieve, then somehow I'm not worthy. And as a child, I remember walking around and I didn't have the words to name these yet, but walking around in the two primary emotions of anxiety and shame. A lot of the shame was body shame, just for the way that I thought I looked, my awkwardness. I remember wanting to talk to girls and just, no, that was never happening as a child, and so yeah, so that's really the core memories that I have as a child. I was mistrusting of my parents. I wouldn't trust them with anything beyond what I could just show them to get them off my back. And an underlying feeling, perpetual feeling of not good enough that lasted until my 30s.
Yeah. And that's a very common story. A lot of us suffer from that, not feeling good enough or being convinced that our worth is tied to what we achieve rather than who we are.
Mm. Yeah,
So one of
I would
the
agree.
one of the phrases you used was approval addiction. Do you want to unpack that for me?
Wow, that's such a good one. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, you can be addicted to a lot of things. I can definitely be addicted to a lot of things. Anything that changes the way that I feel, right? I can get addicted to. And that could be anything. It could be food. It could be, I mean, you name it. But approval, whew, that is such a drug for a lot of people, but myself included, because I always felt like I didn't have enough or it wasn't the right kind. And so it was always kind of this elusive animal that I was chasing, which is, something that I found later in life came from that not good enough, because I didn't have the ability to esteem myself in any sort of positive way. And so I was really reliant upon my environment to do that for me.
And when you don't get that support from the external environment, then you go looking for things to fill that gap.
Yeah. And I really do feel like, a lot of my addiction, if I were to, and this is an extreme oversimplification of it, but I think I desired connection so deeply that, but I feared it as well, because the thing that's required to get intimacy with others is, you got to let down the walls
Vulnerability.
and let people in. Vulnerability, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's what my heart wanted the most in the world, but it's what my head feared the most in the world. And so, in a very real way, alcohol and drugs are a hot wiring of that connection. It's almost like we're all going to take this substance and boom, we're in, and that's how it's really spiraled out of control at an early age for me.
So how young were you when you went down that road of
So
addiction? Because everyone has their different story of what triggered it or
so
how they ended up
I
in
meet
that place.
people. There's a lot of people, Sarah, that were like, well, I had 20 years of normal drinking and then, it just got out of control. Not my story. When I was 13, I started drinking. By the age of 14, I had taken pills, smoked pot, taken acid, taken Xanax. By the age of 16, I was addicted to narcotic painkillers. And by the age of 17, I was smoking crack cocaine. So it was very fast. And the relief that's really I know that everyone gets an effect from drugs and alcohol, obviously, or else people wouldn't do them. But just the relief that I felt the moment that I realized I could change the way that I felt was immense. And it made my sober moments just unbearable, from that point forward. Because I had no solution. They were my solution at that point.
Yeah, and you were so young that was all you really knew.
It's true. And I had an event happen in between my junior and senior year of high school where I was, oh, we have an alarm.
Yeah, I'm not sure why though.
Amber alert, maybe?
Yeah, Amber Alert coming through on my phone.
So
It's a new thing. We don't have them in Australia.
Yeah. We have them here, boy, I'll tell you. So between my junior and senior year, I was growing weed in my closet, and my mother hung up some clothes over one of my grow lights. And at 7 p.m., I turned on my lights, and by 8:30 p.m., I had burned our family home to the ground. And so it was just, I was going into that with Austin as just this big pile of crap. And then I was just heaping more crap on top of it in the way that I viewed myself, right? I already didn't measure up, and now I'm just constantly screwing up and stepping on people's toes, even though I don't mean to. And so, that was a pattern that continued for a long time with me.
Now, you mentioned Mexico. Do you want to
Yeah,
unpack
let's
that part of your story?
Yeah, let's go to Mexico. So, a strange thing about addiction, even if you have sober years, the addiction doesn't really stop its progression, right? So when I was 22, I came into 12-step recovery and actually got sober, and I had a 2-year stint of sobriety and then a 7-year stint of sobriety with one night off in between. But for all intents and purposes, 9 years, I was in 12-step recovery from age 22 to 31. And so I had started a business that became very, very successful, and got married, had my first 2 kids who are now 15 and 12. And I relapsed again because I had stopped doing the simple things that are required for a guy like me to stay sober. And when I relapsed, it was a hellacious relapse, because now I had resources. Now I had money to be able to go out and really destroy my life the way that I had always hoped I could. I was being sarcastic there. And so I go on a run.
At all.
Yeah, I know it didn't land. So I go on a run that was just terrible. And it culminates with me landing in California at a place called Huntington Beach at a detox there. And I arrived in a blackout with just a backpack full of drugs. And I showed up in stage 4 renal failure. And the reason that was happening was because about 5 days prior, I had overdosed. in the Fort Lauderdale Hard Rock Casino on on what I thought was Molly, but it turned out to not be Molly, and it almost killed me. And so I land in California, and they detox me. It takes a while. It takes them about 2 weeks of pumping my body full of fluids to get my levels to come back down. And and I go to this treatment center there. And while I'm there, through a series of events, it becomes obvious to me that the right course of action is to divorce my first wife. She had been relapsing for a while, was trying to run away with her drug dealer. It was a whole scene. And so as I'm divorcing her, there's this woman who works at the rehab who had 7 years sober, cute girl, and was a lesbian, by the way, had been for a long time. And for some reason, when I was telling my first wife that we're getting a divorce, her head, this other girl, her head just kind of flipped around, and I noticed it, and I was going, what in the hell's going on here? And so long story short, her and I actually kick up a relationship, ill-advised. She had 7 years sober. I was barely sober 7 minutes. And she decides she's going to move back to Florida with me. And, I was very, man, I was like a roving, addicted narcissist at this time. Like that was really, I couldn't take responsibility for anything. It was everyone else's fault. I was going to love bomb you and buy you things. And, the game.
Making a whole lot of bad decisions.
Whole lot of bad decisions, right? And so I think we collectively, between the two of us, stayed sober about 60 days after I left that treatment center. I think she was ready to relapse, subconsciously, and here I come along. And so we pick up drugs, and they were hard drugs. And what I didn't know about this girl were two things. One was she had a wicked case of drug-induced schizophrenia, which was, if you're doing cocaine, right, and you've got a schizophrenic person in your house, it's a terrible combination. It's really bad. The other thing I didn't know about her, and the reason that she had this schizophrenia, was that her last name had changed prior to me meeting her. Her last name used to be Gambino, which is a very well-known mafia family here in the United States, and she had had a lot of trauma as a kid. And so her and I go on a terrible run that culminates in a hotel room in Fort Lauderdale with the cops kicking the door in. I'm sitting on the toilet about to shoot heroin, and the cops come in, and there's just drugs and bongs and everything all over the room. And what had happened was, so there's a thing in the state of Florida that's called a Marchman Act. And what that is, if you're using to the point that they can reasonably prove you're probably going to die soon, they can get the courts involved as an attempt to save your life. And so the courts did get involved. And it's the sort of thing where they, it's either rehab or jail, take your pick, and I picked rehab. And so I go to this treatment center for a few days. And I had somehow talked them into letting my second wife into that same treatment center, which is never advised. And on about day 6 or 7, she looks at me from across the group room, and I knew something was up. And she grabs me after, and she says, the judge said you had to go to rehab. He didn't tell you which rehab you had to go to. And I was like, well, you're starting to make a little sense here. And she said, let's go back to California. So we grab our stuff, we grab our suitcases, and we just haul ass. And they're calling the police because I was required to be there from the police. And I booked our plane tickets to California. And at the last moment, I switched them up, called an audible, and I got a direct flight to Cancun because I had a lot of JetBlue miles, and they flew straight to Cancun. And so this starts a run to end all runs in Mexico. Do you want me to go into it? You want me to go a little deeper?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, you got it. So we get to Mexico, right? And I am severely addicted. I have a big bank account and a company that's generating me a lot of money, which I lost subsequently a few months later. But we get to Mexico, and as soon as we get in the taxi, the guy's like, you want some party supplies? Which I know what that means. So he tries to sell me like a gram of cocaine, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do with this? Like, we're going to need bigger bags here. And so he starts getting me plugged in. He gets me a plug at a pharmacy that will just deliver me Xanax anytime I want it. And Cancun's an interesting place in that it's the number one tourist destination in Mexico, first of all, which means it's responsible for a lot of income. And it's a relatively safe place for gringos because it is completely from the top to the bottom run by the Sinaloa cartel. So you can't be a police officer, a taxi driver, anything in that city unless the cartel has some way to prove you. And so when I start buying in the quantities that I like to buy, it was all coming from the cartel, and they immediately identified me as somebody who they wanted to keep supplied. And so, they very quickly put us up in one of their hotels, and then we got kicked out of there because she was schizophrenic and doing terrible things, very loud. And so we move into this condo on Cancun Beach, and there was one day that she, like on a beach when there's rough surf and you shouldn't go swimming, and they put out the red flags to tell you, hey, stay out, right? Well, in her schizophrenic brain, she thought the flags were the things preventing people from swimming. So she runs down on the beach and steals all these flags and comes back up to our fourth floor condo and starts screaming on the balcony that she saved everyone and they're all welcome to go swimming now. And
Yeah.
so the building I was living in kicked her out. And that was great. It was great for me.
To
'cause it kinda
imagine
got her away from
why.
me. Yeah, I know, right? And they said that I could stay, which I appreciated. And so she proceeds to get arrested like 5 times in succession. And the Mexican government deports her back to the United States. So then it's just me with a bunch of money. Literally nobody that was around me was not cartel affiliated in some way. And so they were bringing me, a kilo of cocaine probably every 2 months and just keeping me stocked. And
Feeding your
and
addiction.
absolutely. And I remember like the period of sobriety before where I would think to myself, boy, like I know I can't control it when I use, but maybe I could never run out. Like never running out would probably work for me. It's silly alcoholic addict thinking. And I actually I had achieved that, right? I was at the point where I never had to stop drinking and doing drugs. And I honestly thought I was going to die. That was my intention, anyhow. Once I had stayed in Mexico for a little while, and I want to tell you during this time, I was looking for companionship and connection anywhere I could find it, right? And I would only sleep once every 3 days, and when I would actually sleep and I would wake back up again, I would go into these, hour long sob sessions because I would start looking at pictures of my 3-year-old daughter who I missed more than anything in the world, uh, knowing that I was just never going to see this little girl again. And it was all by my own hand. I had done every bit of it. And so, long story short, I do stay in Mexico for 22 months and I blow through $1 million. I at the very height, I have a 50 milligram a day Xanax habit, about an ounce of cocaine a day, roughly, uh, give or take. And the money runs out before my heart does. I didn't die. And it ends with me being homeless in Mexico City, right? I go to Mexico City to party and I get my wallet stolen, which I had fake Mexican credentials at this point. So I was a Mexican national for all intents and purposes. And there was a girl there that had taken a liking to me on a prior trip. And so I went to live with her and her mother. And, this was a really like interesting point. It didn't get me sober, but in retrospect, I can see how important it was for me. This girl did not do drugs at all. Neither did her mother. And I go to live with her and her mom, and it's in an apartment complex that we in the States would probably call projects, but it was just normal living in Coacalco, Mexico. And and these folks had nothing. And when I walked in, they had dinner waiting on the table for me, and they were the sweetest, most loving people I had probably ever met in my whole life. And what was so interesting about it is I had spent so many years of my life trying to achieve, trying to reach this pinnacle that was finally going to fill this hole in my soul. And these folks didn't have that hole in their soul. And it was never even on their radar that like they weren't even holding $1,000, right? To do that just seems completely out of reach. They actually didn't even have hot running water. So when I was there, if I wanted to take a shower, they had to heat the water up on the stove, and I would, grab a bowl and put it over my head with a bucket. And so I had gone from, high on the hog, so to speak, to, showering out of a bucket in a period of less than 2 years. And as her and I break up, which inevitably does happen because she wanted to get married and I was there for the drugs, and I kept telling her that, and she's like, "No, we're gonna get married." I'm like, "No, we're not." And she didn't like it when I said that. She would get very mad at me. And I end up I go live at my drug dealer's house, and it all culminates with him at 3 a.m. sitting on a couch with a gun pointed at me because I owed him some money. And it was time for me to get out of Florida, or excuse me, out of Mexico. And there was a real pivotal moment that happened. Looking back, meeting this girl and her mother was very, very important. But I came back to the States, overdosed again. I was in really bad shape mentally, and physically probably. And I go to a rehab, and they pegged me pretty quickly. Like I gave them all the symptoms, right? I wouldn't show them an emotion. I wouldn't let anyone behind the wall. I had a great knowledge about the 12-step literature. So I would always try. It was just, I was putting on a show. You know what I was doing. And,
Yes.
and
You
one,
were
one day
ticking all the boxes and doing all the things you were supposed to be doing, but not really doing the work.
right, completely ingenuine. Right. And there was one day that the therapist came in and she put a picture of her little 18-month-old girl up on the board. And she asked us the question. She said, "What does this little girl have to do to deserve love?" And nobody could look at that picture and say anything, right? It was, of course, nothing, absolutely nothing. She has value because she exists, right? And and the therapist made the very, very strong argument that the only difference between me and that girl was an idea, and that I was the only one that had that idea. And that was going to be the
Smart
very thing that
therapist.
was going to take me down. Yeah, it was pivotal. It was such a moment for me. And then in addition to that, that was a piece of it. But in addition to that, I had a very close friend who I had met in there, and we just bonded very quickly. Like, we became besties. And they would do this type of experiential therapy where they would, have us close our eyes, and they would take us back to a potentially traumatic moment, right? And get very detailed on it, etc. And and I watched him in front of the group go into some things that I know he had shame about, that I know that were very difficult for him, and do it courageously. And it gave me permission to try and do the same. But one area that I had a difficult time with was my family. So up until this point, I had been to 6 rehabs, I think, prior to this. And my family were always off limits. Anytime they would want to do family of origin stuff, I would just say, they're great people. Like, I had such a nice upbringing. But the truth was my dad was a workaholic and not really around much. And my mom, 5 o'clock was happy hour every night. So she was drinking every night. While she may have seemed attentive and affectionate, the truth was she was getting drunk every night. And so, the truth was she let me grow pot in the house. The truth was, I was selling weed and she knew about it and didn't do anything to stop it. Like, these were and what I learned was impact versus intent, meaning people can be well-intentioned, but impact us negatively. And if I don't get to what the impact actually was, I'm not going to heal from this. And so it gave me permission to really get into that, Sarah. And I did. And combine that with, I had lost everything. Every manipulation tool I had at my disposal years earlier was gone. The money was gone, all of it. And so I really had no choice but to figure out, okay, I'm going to go and give people the actual me, and let's see what happens. Let's see if I'm actually enough. And it turns out I was. That was the moral of the story. Is it turns out I was. And so, now I'm a father of 5, and I have 5 children, including my 2 that I left Mexico on, left to Mexico on. I have full custody of them today. So anyhow, that's the Mexico story.
And that's also a bit of the man that you were. Now,
Sure.
how about you tell us
Totally.
about the man that you are now? Because there would have been a lot of shame in your story, and the addiction story is never an easy one. It's not just a simple stop, whatever it is that is the problem. There's a lot of rebuilding that happens after that. And it's only when you, I think, when you hit that rock bottom of you've got nowhere else to go, nothing else to do but to try and heal. And you faced that and did the work. So take us through that a little bit, but more, tell us who you are now, because we've heard who you were.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll give you that. So it's been 10 years since I came back from Mexico, and it was not a linear process by any stretch of the imagination. I told you I was really, even in my prior stint of sobriety, I was still what ended up happening was when I came into 12-step recovery, I found out that people gave me the attention I had desired for good things. Now they gave me attention for sobriety. And so I was still using it as a tool to put that fire out in my soul. And it worked for a while until it didn't. And so, I've been married to a woman for the last 8 years who is, she's a therapist herself and is just a remarkable woman who actually, when I met her, she came as a whole person, right? She was just a healed, whole entire person. And when she met me, about 9 months to a year after treatment. And I came as a pretty whole person, right? I've been doing a lot of work in 12-step fellowship, which for anyone that doesn't know, a lot of that is, working towards a spiritual experience, inventory, making restitution, making amends, service to others, right? These are the things that the 12-step fellowships generally work you towards. And when I got custody of my kids back, I didn't know how to be a father. I truly, I had no clue. I thought it was iPads and chicken nuggets for a while. And I realized
If only that worked.
No, it didn't work. It was bad. But my wife, Haley, knew how to be a mother. Even though she didn't have any kids of her own, she had been a nanny for 10 years and she knew what that looked like. And so she guided me towards learning what it meant to be a father. And that was not an easy process for me. I actually struggled with being a dad a lot because there's this huge self-centered part of me that I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. And these darn kids were getting in the way of that and, blah, blah, blah. And so I actually had a couple of relapses since then. I have 2.5 years sober right now, but it was not a linear process. So for me, the only way I've ever been able to stay sober is in a community of sober people, right? Where we're all working towards a common purpose. And, in South Florida, I had that. Then we moved up to Orlando where I currently live. And, my ass wasn't on fire. I wasn't fresh out of Mexico. And so I didn't rebuild those relationships and I stumbled a couple of times, but something happened this last time is I went into a rehab center and I remember sitting there and having the very conscious thought, this is the first time I'm in rehab where I actually have everything I could ever want in this world. All I have to do is not give it away again. And so that was a weird experience for me. And so, in the writing of the book, which took about 4 years, what was going on is I was working with my writing team. And then the very next day I'm going to therapy because I have a therapist whom I see him twice a week now, but I was seeing him once a week at the time. And I would go and talk about, when you're writing a book, it's not just a vague story in your mind. You have to give it detail. You have to really get into the minutia of what happened because you're now telling a story on paper. And through the process of writing that, it really helped me to defragment my own story. And it helped me to correct a lot of the lies that I had been telling myself about the reasons why things happened the way that they happened. And and I will tell you that, pride, and I'm sure this is not limited to just me. Um, but pride has been a big difficulty in my sobriety, right? Anything that starts with the phrase "I don't have to because," or "you should be like this because," or anything that basically makes me project out different than everyone else, right? It comes to kind of down, or what about me, right? What about me? And I don't know if this is a male thing or a human thing, but like I would always have this unconscious, perhaps subconscious belief that if I don't if I don't fight for my rights, if I don't fight for what should be coming to me, then what's going to be left of me, right? And what I found out was that I was not lessened in any way by stopping this behavior. And in fact, you know, my relationships, which are the thing that I want more than anything in this world, I started to be able to have them. And I have a very close knit recovery community here. And what was interesting about it, when I was just coming back in, there's a guy in our meeting who he had about 6 or 7 years sober at the time. And he had picked up a really bad gambling habit and he had gotten himself into about $100,000 in debt. And he was very scared to tell his wife that he had done this. He was going to have to file bankruptcy. But what he was doing was he was coming to that meeting every week and he was sharing about his fears in this group of men. And what he was a kind of a beacon of light for me to give me permission once again to let my walls down, right? That was something I could never do in my previous stints of sobriety, was to let my walls down, to really let you see me, because I was just so deathly afraid that if you saw me, you wouldn't love me. And and so in this recovery community I have, right, the coolest thing, the best thing we can do for one another is to just give ourselves intimacy, right? Just gut honesty that doesn't look good,
Yeah.
vulnerability. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
We get to a point where we realize that vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's a strength. And letting ourselves be vulnerable actually helps other people see that light within us, and also
yeah,
helps us to face those demons of shame and guilt. So this life was never meant to be a solo process of the I have to do it all by myself and I have to get it all right and I have to have all the answers. No, we need that community around us. We need, for when we don't have the answers, to be able to have somebody who we can say, "Hey, I don't know, can you help me work it through?" And I'm so
absolutely.
glad, yeah, I'm so glad that you've found that community, because like some of the stories I've heard of addiction and recovery, it is that community that is incredibly important, especially when you are struggling, so that somebody else can see that struggle and remind you that you don't have to be alone. And I think that's true of all the struggles that we go through in life, whether it's addiction or grief or any other challenge that we might come up against. When we realize that we're not the only one, it makes that challenge a little easier to face.
Absolutely. I mean, that feeling of you're not alone, I don't really know how to describe that, but I remember the first time I got it early on in my first stint in sobriety. And I truly in my heart thought I was so far gone, nobody could possibly understand what I had done, how I had messed up my life. There was just no turning back from it. And it turns out that now all those things that I've done, I can use to someone else's benefit, to share about it, or whatever the case may be. I remember, early on, I got really into yoga when I first got sober, and I remember going to this class, and the teacher had been, oh gosh, she had been teaching yoga for probably 40 years. She was an elderly woman. And before the class started, she said, at my age, I struggle with the poses. So I'm going to do the easy poses instead of the hard poses, but I'll describe the hard poses to you guys. And I just remembered the feeling I got as the instructor of the class was humble enough to say, hey, look, here's how I've got to do this. It's just the place that I'm at. And it just made it okay for me to not do it perfectly either, and that stuck with me. That was like, gosh, that was like 9 years ago that happened. And I never forgot it, you know? And so that's the kind of light that I hope, I can bring.
Yeah. So, for anyone who's listening who is feeling whether trapped by their past or convinced that they're broken beyond repair, what would you want them to know?
Wow, that's a great question. So I know that feeling. First of all, I know exactly how you feel. And nothing is beyond repair, but you can't do it alone. And don't even try and do it alone. Doing it alone is like trying to drive from Florida to California and you end up in Chicago. It's like, yeah, you might eventually get to California, but you're taking the long way through. Let somebody who's been there guide you.
Yes. Because while sometimes taking the scenic route can be fun and we learn lots of lessons we wouldn't if we just went from A to B without any detours, sometimes having somebody sitting beside you saying, don't go that way because it'll take us a gazillion times longer than we want it to, is really
Hmm.
helpful.
Totally helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been my experience is having a sponsor, having someone to, because I don't see the truth about my own life. I just can't because I'm driven by emotion, you know? If I can be I could tell the guy begging for money on the side of the street about one of the problems I'm going through, and he will see that more clearly and be able to give me more solution probably than I'm going to come up with just because he's objective, you know?
Yeah, he's got that distance. It's
Right.
always easier to
Exactly.
solve somebody else's problems than your own. And
Totally.
sometimes
Totally.
other people see what you're going through more clearly than what you do as well for
Hmm.
that different perspective.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now you do have an amazing book out.
I
So
do.
if do you want to tell us a little bit about that, including how if anybody wants to get hold of it, is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, sure. So this is the book. It's called One Last Hit. You will not be confused about the subject matter because it's all over the cover. And you can get it on Amazon. Just go to Amazon and search for One Last Hit by Austin Rampt, and it will pull up.
Yeah. And if anyone wanted to learn more about you and your work or maybe connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. So my website is onelasthitbook.com, and my contact information is right on there. And you can link to, I have a shop there which sells the book in various different forms. I have a podcast, One Last Hit podcast that I do, and all that links to, through that website. So that would be the spot.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with today? Any one last piece of wisdom?
Not really, except to say I was so scared for so much of my life to lead with my heart. Like I really was. And even today, I know that I'm my default is not to lead with my heart, but man, life gets so much better when I do. And I hope people will see that for what it's worth.
Yes. To actually live a heart-centered life is filled with joy. It's not easy, but it's much, much better when actually you come at something as a whole person and you do lead with your heart as well as occasionally coming from a headspace too.
Yeah, of course. Of
Yeah.
course.
But yes, we need to emotions have their place. We need to feel things because to borrow a line from a friend of mine, if you don't feel it, you can't heal it. So we've got
Yeah.
to let ourselves have those feelings and work through them. And quite often, as we saw in your story, it's those underlying feelings of I'm not worthy, or I'm not good enough, or I have to achieve to be loved. It's those emotions that are running the show. It's those stories that we tell ourselves, and sometimes those stories aren't true.
Yep. Oftentimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
As that wise therapist of yours, when she showed you that picture of her 18-month-old daughter, said the only difference between her and you when it comes to being worthy of love is the story you're telling yourself.
Bingo.
Because each and every one of us is worthy of being loved just for who we are, just because we are in this world, and each one of us comes into this world with a unique gift that only we can give to it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Man, that's great. I really like your format. And I like your dragon. Your dragon's been looking at me the whole time, and I
Yeah,
love the dragon.
my dragon's pretty cool.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
Because while some people view dragons as scary and mean and things to be fought, I think dragons are wise creatures who can help and support us. They know a lot, they've seen a lot.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
they
I
don't
love that.
they're not big and scary, they're helpful.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's great. My wife and I love the House of the Dragon show that's
Yeah,
on HBO.
it's pretty good.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so, so much for joining me today and for so
Absolutely.
openly sharing your story, including those really hard moments where you even said you were hoping you'd die. You were hoping you wouldn't have to face all of that stuff. But I am very glad that you did actually face it, and now you're using that to give something good to the world.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. And I really appreciate you having me on.
So, for everyone listening, if today's conversation resonated with you, then share it. Share it with someone who just might need to hear it. Until next time, I'm Sarah Jordan Ross, and this has been Taboo Talk with Sarah. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and most importantly, remember your story matters, so share it, because you never know when it's your story that will change someone else's life. And I'm kind of hoping that hearing Austin's story will change a few people who may be struggling, who will help them to see that there is light at the end of that tunnel. For now.